If you are over 65 and you start your day with toast, add a little sugar to your tea, and finish dinner by reaching for the salt shaker before you even taste the food, you may be doing something millions of older adults do every single day without realizing what it is quietly doing to their heart. And here's what makes this unsettling. The damage does not arrive with a warning, no alarm, no dramatic moment. Just blood pressure creeping up year after year, arteries slowly stiffening, inflammation smoldering in the background. And then one day, someone sitting in a doctor's office says, "I had absolutely no idea anything was wrong." Now I know what some of you are thinking. Can 3 ordinary white foods really make that kind of difference? And the honest answer is yes. Especially after 65, when your blood vessels are less forgiving, your kidneys are less efficient, and your heart is working harder with every passing year. One of these foods is probably sitting in your kitchen right now. Another is sold as comfort food across every culture on earth. And the third is hiding inside products people still genuinely believe are harmless. Stay with me. Food 1, white salt. This is the one I notice most in everyday life. I will sit down with someone at dinner, and before they have even lifted a fork, the salt shaker is already moving. It feels completely harmless because salt is tiny, it dissolves, and you cannot see it doing anything dramatic. But inside the body, sodium behaves like a sponge. It holds onto water. More sodium means more fluid circulating through your system, and that means more pressure pushing against the walls of your blood vessels around the clock. Your heart then has to pump into that elevated pressure all day, every year. Here's the analogy I always come back to. Imagine watering a garden with a hose while someone keeps slowly narrowing the nozzle. The water still comes out, but the pressure builds. That is exactly what your heart is dealing with when sodium stays too high. Now, I am not going to overstate this. Sodium is a nuanced topic, and individual responses vary. But the broad pattern in the research is unmistakable. A crossover trial published in JAMA in 2023 looked at adults aged 50 to 75 and found that just 1 week on a low sodium diet lowered systolic blood pressure by about 8 points compared with a high sodium diet. 8 points. That is the kind of difference doctors act on. And a New England Journal of Medicine trial showed that switching older adults with hypertension to a salt substitute reduced stroke, major cardiovascular events, and death compared with regular salt. That is not a small finding. And here's what changes after 65 specifically. Your kidneys may no longer clear sodium as efficiently as they once did. Your arteries are often less elastic than they were at 40. So the same salty meal that barely moved the needle years ago can hit your system considerably harder now. But let me say something important here, because I hear this concern constantly. Bland food is not the answer. Smarter flavor is the answer. The real problem for most people is not the pinch they add at the table. It is the hidden sodium they never think about. Bread, canned soup, crackers, deli meats, bottled sauces, frozen meals. These are where the numbers stack up silently before dinner even starts. And there is another layer to this. As taste buds naturally dull with age, food can seem flatter, so the hand reaches for more salt. That is completely understandable. But what most people are actually missing is contrast, not sodium. Acid, fresh herbs, texture, and a little heat wake food up in a completely different way. A squeeze of lemon over vegetables. Fresh dill stirred into fish. Mustard rubbed onto chicken. Onions roasted until they turn almost sweet. Suddenly a meal tastes alive again, without touching the salt shaker once. Here is your practical move for tomorrow. Before you change anything else, read just 2 labels. The bread you buy most often and the soup or sauce you use most often. Look at the sodium per serving. Most people are genuinely shocked by what they find. The American Heart Association recommends staying under 2,300 milligrams per day, with an ideal closer to 1,500 if blood pressure is already a concern. A simple rule worth remembering. If one packaged item carries more than 15 to 20% of your daily sodium, treat it as an occasional food rather than a daily habit. Once you start tasting food before salting it, your palate adjusts faster than almost anyone expects. Food 2, white bread and refined white flour. Now here is something that genuinely surprised me the first time I paid close attention to it. People fear sugar, but they give white bread a free pass, as if bread belongs in a completely different moral category. It does not. White bread, white rolls, most crackers, pastries, regular pasta, and a huge range of breakfast cereals all behave less like nourishing staples and more like rapid starch delivery systems. You eat them, they digest fast, blood sugar rises quickly, insulin spikes with it, and then hunger returns sooner than it should. When that cycle repeats day after day across years, it quietly pushes the body toward higher triglycerides, greater insulin resistance, and a cardiovascular profile that becomes less and less friendly over time. The analogy that makes this click for people is simple. Think of whole grains as logs on a fire and refined flour as paper. Logs burn slow and steady. Paper flares brilliantly and then it is gone. Whole grain foods still carry their fiber and natural structure. Refined flour has had most of that stripped away, so the body handles them very differently. A large prospective study published in the BMJ in 2021, drawing on data from nearly 150,000 people across 21 countries, found that higher intake of refined grains was associated with significantly higher risk of major cardiovascular disease and total mortality. Meanwhile, whole grains did not show that same harmful pattern. That is real-world eating across vastly different populations and diets. And the American Heart Association has repeated the same guidance for decades. Choose mostly whole grains rather than refined grains for a heart-healthier dietary pattern. That is not a trend. That is durable, consistent evidence. Here's the double problem refined flour creates specifically after 65. It spikes glucose and insulin, and at the same time, it crowds out better foods. Someone fills their day with toast, biscuits, crackers, white pasta, and bakery snacks, and then genuinely wonders why their energy is unpredictable and their appetite feels unstable. And I want to acknowledge something real here because I think it matters. White bread is comforting. For many people, it is tied to memory, to routine, to childhood, to ease of eating. I am not pretending this is a purely biochemical decision. Food is emotional. Food is cultural. Change works better when you respect that. So I am not asking for perfection. I am asking for a better default. Maybe you keep the weekend toast you genuinely enjoy, but stop the mindless slices that come automatically with every soup, every snack, every rushed morning. Maybe you have the pasta portion and add beans, roasted vegetables, and olive oil, so the meal slows down metabolically without losing its warmth and comfort. Your practical move here is to make one swap first, not 10. Change the single most frequent refined flour food in your day. If breakfast is white toast every morning, shift to oats or a true whole grain bread, where whole grain is the first ingredient on the label. If lunch always involves a white bun, try a whole grain wrap, a handful of lentils, or even a baked potato with the skin on. Whole foods are fundamentally different from refined flour products. Structure matters, fiber matters, what the body is required to work through matters. Once you stop treating white flour as neutral, the sugar conversation starts to make a great deal more sense. Food 3, white sugar. This one gets discussed so often that some people have already stopped listening. They hear sugar is bad, they think yes, yes, I know, and then they stir 2 spoons into their morning coffee, pour sweet sauce over dinner, drink juice because it sounds natural, and finish the evening with a dessert they barely register eating. Here's the thing. After 65, blood sugar handling often becomes measurably less efficient. Muscle mass, which helps buffer glucose, is usually lower than it once was. Sleep is frequently more fragmented, which itself disrupts insulin sensitivity. And all of that makes the body more vulnerable to repeated sugar surges than it was 30 years ago. The heart does not only care about cholesterol, it cares about blood pressure, chronic inflammation, triglycerides, insulin resistance, fatty liver accumulation, and body weight. Added sugar can touch every single one of those. The analogy I return to is traffic. Your bloodstream can handle cars moving through steadily and efficiently, but pour in a rush hour jam several times a day, and the whole system gets stressed, strained, and eventually damaged. And sugar rarely travels alone. It tends to arrive in foods that are low in fiber and engineered to be easy to overeat, which means you can consume a surprising amount without ever feeling genuinely full or even noticing how much you have had. You know exactly how this happens. A biscuit with afternoon tea becomes such a habit that it barely registers as a choice. A bowl of sweet cereal feels light, so the hand pours more. A fruit yogurt sounds like a healthy option, but nutritionally it is closer to dessert. A major study published in JAMA Internal Medicine in 2014, following more than 31,000 adults, found that people who obtained 17 to 21% of their daily calories from added sugar had a significantly higher risk of dying from cardiovascular disease than those who kept added sugar lower. The risk climbed even higher at very high intakes. Nutrition studies are rarely perfect, and I would never overstate the evidence, but that is a signal that deserves serious attention. Now, many of you will want to know, does fruit count? Not in the same way. Whole fruit comes with water, fiber, the act of chewing, and a much slower pace of absorption. What I worry about is added sugar in drinks, flavored sauces, bottled yogurts, breakfast products, desserts, and the foods marketed as low fat that quietly compensate for their missing flavor with sweetness. Many people reduce fat with every good intention and accidentally replace it with sugar, then cannot understand why their heart markers are not improving. And sugar has a sneaky social dimension too. Nobody thinks twice about offering cake, sweet tea, or a pastry as a small kindness. One treat is not a catastrophe. I want to be clear about that. The repetition is what becomes the problem. A sweet breakfast, a sweet afternoon drink, a little dessert after dinner, and the body spends most of its days managing glucose swings it never truly gets a break from. I have had many people tell me they do not even have a sweet tooth. But when we walk through a normal day together in detail, added sugar shows up 5 or 6 times without them even realizing it. That is the real issue, not the awareness, the invisibility. As for artificial sweeteners, I would rather help you gradually dial down the need for intense sweetness altogether than simply swap one very sweet pattern for another. The World Health Organization has stated that non-sugar sweeteners should not be relied on as a long-term strategy for reducing disease risk. So my strong preference is usually to retrain the palate slowly. Make your coffee a little less sweet each week. Choose plain yogurt and add fresh berries. Use cinnamon or vanilla to bring warmth and sweetness without pouring sugar into everything. Within just a few weeks, foods that once tasted completely normal begin to taste overwhelmingly sweet. That shift is one of the most encouraging things to experience because it proves that lasting change does not have to feel like permanent deprivation. Your practical rule is this: do not start by banning dessert forever. Start by eliminating liquid sugar and hidden sugar first. Look at what you drink every single day. Tea, coffee, sodas, bottled smoothies, energy drinks, sweetened milky drinks, and fruit juice all add up faster than most people realize. Then read ingredient labels and look for the words sugar, syrup, glucose, fructose, honey, maltose, and concentrate. If sugar appears near the top of the list in something you eat every day, that food has earned a serious rethink. And if you do want something sweet, have it after a protein-rich meal rather than on an empty stomach. That one small adjustment often blunts the blood sugar spike significantly and reduces the urge to keep snacking afterward. Before we finish, I want to say something that I think is genuinely important. Not all white foods are villains. Plain yogurt can be excellent. Cauliflower is outstanding. Beans, oats, milk, and many simple whole foods absolutely fit into a heart-healthy pattern. The issue has never been the color. The issue is what processing has done to the food, how quickly it drives blood pressure or blood sugar upward, and how effortlessly easy it is to eat far too much without ever noticing. The foods causing the quietest, most consistent damage are almost always the ones that feel the most normal, the most comforting, and the most completely unthreatening. So if I were sitting at your kitchen table and you asked me where to begin after 65, I would keep it very simple. Cut back on hidden sodium in packaged foods. Replace the refined flour staples you eat most often with whole food alternatives. And reduce the added sugar that sneaks into your drinks, your sauces, your breakfasts, and your evenings. You do not need a detox. You do not need a miracle food or a complicated plan. You need fewer silent stressors, repeated less often, week after week after week. That is how heart protection actually works. It is almost never glamorous. It is a series of quiet corrections made consistently over time. Taste before salting, read one label, swap one breakfast, cut one sugary drink. Do those things repeatedly, and the body often responds in ways that feel larger than the effort required. Energy steadies, blood pressure improves, cravings calm down, lab numbers start moving in the right direction, and that is what we are genuinely after. Not perfection, momentum, small choices, repeated daily, often rescue hearts long before any symptoms appear. Thank you for spending this time with me. I truly appreciate it. If this helped you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And explore the channel, because I have done a full video on heart-healthy eating and another specifically on blood pressure habits if you want to go deeper. Take care of yourself, and I will see you in the next one.